Good evening and welcome to you on behalf of Milim. Our online series of talks and conversations continues tonight with the author Amanda Weinberg. I'll introduce Amanda in just a few moments. Please do ask questions. You can post a question anytime you like by using the Q&A facility on your screen and typing in anything you would like to ask. As ever, we will try to get through as many of your questions as possible. Let me also draw your attention to the chat facility, which allows you to send a message to all of the other participants on this webinar, should you wish to do so. So you could use this, for example, to let everybody know who you are and where you are. Finally, this event is being recorded and will be posted on the Milim website at milim.org.uk in the next few days. The Milim website has details of future events, lets you book tickets, and even make a small donation to help with the cost of running our programme. And so to our speaker. Amanda Weinberg studied modern languages at the University of East Anglia, followed by a postgraduate certificate in education at King's College London. She ran a company in international advertising sales and now teaches French and German. She lives in London with her family, but now spends a lot of time in Pitigliano, Italy, the setting for the fictional Monterini of the title of her debut novel, The Tears of Monterini. Now, this is a story of Jacobo and Angelo. Jacobo is a Jewish intellectual dreamer. Angelo is a contadino farmer, and they're best friends. And their Jewish and Catholic families live side by side against a backdrop of communal life, Etruscan tales, and significantly the rise of Benito Mussolini. They both have children, Bella and Rico, born on the same day, and they grow up together and fall in love. And then with the declaration of the racial laws in 1938, a whole raft of tensions simmer between the surface of their love and friendship. And when war is finally declared, their peaceful village is torn apart and life will never be the same again. Amanda, welcome. How nice of you to be with us. Tell me, what inspired you to write this book?
Good evening, everyone, first. Well, I always wanted to write. I wasn't able to write many years ago because I was working full time, had 2 young children, but I knew one day I would write a novel, but I wasn't sure what the novel would be about. And then my husband and I decided we were going to go on holiday one year. We usually always go to France, and we decided instead we were going to go to Italy. We didn't know where to go in Italy. We'd been there once before, I think, in my life, and he'd been there once before many years ago. And so we spoke to our neighbour who was Italian, the neighbour who was living next door to me at the time. And she spoke to a friend who knew somebody who had a flat that she was happy to rent to us for a few weeks in the summer. So let me take you back to 1998, because this is quite a long time ago. So we tried to find some information on this particular village called Pitigliano, and there was absolutely nothing. It was the days really pre-internet. The internet had just started. We tried to do the dial-up CompuServe, find out more about the village. We then looked in guidebooks, or the guidebook said, avoid southern Tuscany, it's really boring, don't go there, terrible. But we'd already decided to go. So we went completely blind. We knew nothing about it. We packed the children into the car, off we set, through France, through Switzerland, through Italy, and we arrived very close to where we needed to go to the village. So we were driving along the road, knew nothing about it. And please bear in mind, we were told it is boring part of Tuscany, there's nothing to do, nothing to see. So we were driving along, and then we came to a corner of the road bends very suddenly, and it's by a church called Madonna della Grazia. And as it bends, we pulled in, and then the most spectacular view just spotted out at us. And if you just bear with me, I'll share my screen, because I want you to bear in mind, we were told there's nothing to see, nothing to do. And then we saw this most incredible village. So this is the view that popped out in front of us from the corner of the road. And so it was quite spectacular, very magical. We couldn't quite believe it. And we thought, well, how could they say there was nothing to do there? I mean, it's just the most beautiful place. It was very, you can't really see in this particular a photo, but it was, it's a very golden color. It's very beautiful, and it's built on the mound of tufa at the bottom. There's this golden tufa rock, which we didn't know at the time, but is Etruscan and is full of Etruscan caves and Etruscan pathways. And then on top, you've got the medieval village, which was built in the 11th, 12th century. And that's all we saw. We didn't know anything else. So then we started our journey around the village, and I can show you another photo here. This is the other side of the village. So we started our journey round, and we went past what we later discovered was the Jewish cemetery, but we didn't know at the time. We arrived in the village, parked our car, and the very first thing we saw when we parked our car was this. So we both looked at each other and we couldn't quite believe what we'd seen. And we thought, well, hang on. First of all, the place is absolutely stunning. Secondly, there's a synagogue. What is this place? What's happened? So we parked our car and started walking down the road, and we discovered lots of little shops where they were selling kosher wine, matzah, and wonderful Jewish delicacies. And we realized we'd fallen upon something very special at the time, very unknown. Nobody knew about it. It was really unknown in the UK. We subsequently called Julian's, my husband's father, to see if he knew about it. And he looked up in all of he's got lots and he had lots and lots of Encyclopedia Judaica. There was no mention of Pitiliano. So we realized it was something very special. And more or less immediately, the idea for a novel started to germinate in my mind. And it was almost as if I could see my characters in those streets. So that was the beginning. I'll stop sharing my screen now. Sorry. I've gone too far. Stop share. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm back.
So you had a location, yeah, and you knew there was some Jewish activity there at some point. Was there anything Jewish happening now? I mean, when you discovered it?
Well, we obviously then started looking into it, and we thought, what's happening? What is it? And we got to know that the lady called Elena Servi, who ran the synagogue, and we started discovering a little bit more about the culture and about the history. And bit by bit, we became more involved. The following year, we bought a house there, and every year subsequently, we went to Pitiliano, and I became quite involved in the community, which is really one lady and her nephew and her son. But I became involved in the community in general in Pitiliano, because what was so interesting about the community was the love between the Catholics and the Jews, which I tried to portray in my book. And so I started to ask people questions, and I just started to talk to people about information and what they went through and what life was like back in the day and also now. And I think the period that interested me the most was the war period and what life was like pre-Mussolini's rise to power and then during Mussolini's rise to power. And so then I started to research, and I knew that this story was there and I knew my characters were there, and I began to do a lot more research about it and discovered things that people did for each other and also how Mussolini changed the fabric of the society.
So that's why you chose this particular period. How has the town changed since then? Is it pretty much as it was, or has it been modernized in any way?
From when we first went there, or from the
no, from the period you wrote about?
From the periods I wrote about. I think when we first arrived, it hadn't changed, actually. It was very similar to that era. The synagogue wasn't bombed during the war. It was one of the very few synagogues in Italy, actually, that didn't suffer during the war. So it was still intact. But in 1960, it completely collapsed, which was really terrible. And it took several years. I think it was until about 1985 that they managed to get enough money to do a huge refurbishment. And it opened again in 1996. So we arrived just after it had opened. The area was still really, I mean, a lot of my friends who came said it's like going back to the 11th century, and it really was. But I think in the 20 years since we've been there, it has changed a little bit because it's become much more well known, it's become much more touristy. And since the era of Airbnb and booking, a lot of people in the old town have actually decided to rent out their properties. And as they do that, then the fabric of the old town, which was very much what we enjoyed when we were there and what people spoke about as being so special, that has been slightly eroded, unfortunately.
So there weren't really any Jewish people there, or hardly any Jewish people when you arrived, but there were quite a lot of remnants of the community that had been there. So what remains?
So,
you mentioned the synagogue.
Yes, I can share my screen. Before I do and show a photo of the synagogue, it's worth mentioning Eleanor Survey was she was there during the period that I was talking about in my book, and I actually dedicate the book partly to her. She has been completely responsible for completely refurbishing the synagogue, for keeping the history and the culture of this village alive. With her son, they formed the association, which they called La Piccola Gerusalemme, which means Little Jerusalem, because that was the original name of the town in the 17th and 18th centuries. It was called Little Jerusalem because of its Jewish community. So she's been really, really fundamental in keeping the history going. But it's not just her, because the other citizens of the village are so proud of the Jewish past of the village. So a lot of them are involved in the synagogue. They belong to it. They pay money to be part of it. It's really quite amazing. And that was the thing that struck me so enormously when we first went there, how everybody felt that it was just so important, this culture there. And when people discovered that we were Jewish, they would take my hand, they would even kiss my hand, and were so happy to have another Jewish family involved in the town. And that was really different from experiences we'd had in other places, actually. It was just really wonderful to be welcomed as Jews in this town.
Now, you said that you had your characters; they were already in your mind. The characters in this novel are very vivid. They're very they're convincing. You feel you know them quite early in the book. How did you go about actually fleshing out these characters? What's your sort of process for creating them?
Well, as I said earlier, the characters kind of came to me. I'm going to have a look and see if I can share my screen again, so bear with me. Just going to go back a bit. I'm just going to go back a little bit here. So, sorry about this, going the wrong way. Hang on, I might have to ask you, Alan, perhaps you can just give me, as I'm not getting to the one that I want, if you could give me number 6, would that be possible? Just going to wait for one of this. So if we could get number 6. You're also struggling with getting to the right ones. We'll come to these photos in a moment as we go through the questions. But if we can get to, so it's the one after this, Alan. Hang on, we go back. I'm struggling a little bit with the screen. Can we go to the one before that, to 6? Okay. That's it. Right. So these are the streets that very much inspired me. The wrong one. Can we go to the one that we just had, Alan? 1 second. It's number 6. That's it. So these were the streets that I actually envisaged seeing my characters. The one on the right is the street actually where we subsequently bought a house, and the plants are they belong to my neighbor opposite. And I saw my characters sitting on a terrace in these streets. I actually saw them, and it was like they came to me, and I just allowed them to develop. And then I knew the characters I wanted to write about, and I allowed them to develop. And then I began talking to people. I spoke to Eleanor. I spoke to all these lovely elderly members of the community. And I got lots of stories, which I then incorporated around my characters' lives, as well as events that I read about and researched to do with Mussolini and how he changed the lives of the villagers. One character in particular, which again, let's see if we can get to him. Alan, is there any way we can have number 14? While we wait for the slide to come up, there was one character in particular. There we go, that's Marino. So my character Rico in the book, I don't know, maybe you haven't all read the book, some people have, some people haven't. Rico is one of the main characters, and Rico is a partisan. And this wonderful gentleman here, whose name is Marino, on the picture on the left, he was 90. He was a partisan in Pitigliano, and he gave me a lot of information on what it was like being a partisan at such a difficult time. And I think it's quite important to note that during the Mussolini era, when Mussolini first came to power, even though there were the racial laws in 1938, the life for the Jews wasn't as difficult as it was for the anti-fascists. So particularly in Pitigliano, they more or less carried on in the same way that they did before. There were the racial laws and things did change, and they weren't able to work as doctors or as teachers. They could have their own businesses. So things did change, but in Pitigliano, they were very much helped. And for the anti-fascists, like, it was a very different story. And he was a partisan. He was 17 years old, and he explained to me the difficulties of what it was like living in a village at the time that was fascist and how he survived. And he was actually chased by fascists into a cave, and then they found him and imprisoned him in Pitigliano. He was incarcerated in Pitigliano. Oops, that's a bit too far. I'll stop. Should we stop sharing the screen? Thank you. So he was imprisoned, and then he explained to me, I asked him what it was like afterwards, went after the war, and he came back and he said it was as if, you know, everybody just got on with their lives. And he still sees some of those people today. They're old like he is, but they just got on with their lives. And it was this very strange experience for me, listening to how somebody who wasn't Jewish at the time of a really, really difficult time during World War II, who wasn't Jewish, who did have to experience some terrible, terrible things, and then came back and lived side by side with the people who were who behaved so badly towards him. So he helped me. He explained a lot of what it was like being a partisan. He helped me to understand the difficulties living in a village in Italy and being a partisan. And the thing about him that is so special, on the picture that we just saw, he was pushing a huge barrel full of wine and cheese. At the age of 90, he was still making himself. So he's quite a character.
Did you meet any Jewish survivors from the period?
I did. Now, it's whether or not we can get to it when we share the screen. You want to try Ellen? Do you want to try Elena Servi, Alan? She's on number 13.
And this is the lady who's looking after the shawl.
Now, this is the lady that's looking after the shawl. She's formed. That's it. That's her. So she's the elderly lady on the left. She's actually become quite famous because very recently Jamie Oliver did a series on Italy called them the Nonnas, all the old grandmas, and he chose Siciliano as one of the series to go, and he met Elena Servi, and she taught him how to make one of the traditional Jewish dishes that she would have made for Rosh Hashanah. So she was in the program, so she became quite famous, but she didn't realize who Jamie Oliver was. She thought he was just a student. And when you watch the program, it's quite funny how she relates to him. She's the most fantastic woman. She's 90 as well. Her family were saved by people in Pitigliano, and a very elderly man called Fortunato Sono, who was remembered. He's mentioned in Yad Vashem for saving the family's life. And he was loosely based on my character Angelo, who does save Jacopo's family. So I used the story of Fortunato Sono, who would go on his donkey to Elena Servi's, where they were hiding, her family were hiding for 7-8 months. He took food to them every day. And other people in the village that I met subsequently and became friendly with, they all told me of stories where they took medicine to people that were hiding. They took food to people that were hiding. There was always a story linking somebody, a Catholic in Pitigliano with a Jewish family. It was quite amazing. And because of that, there was so much material there for me to work on. So there was all the material and all the stories I gleaned from the people within the village. And then there were stories that I gleaned from my research, and then taking it slightly further. And I did take it slightly further. I then found out about a story of a villa in Emilia-Romagna, which you may remember about because you've read the book. A friend of mine told me about this particular villa, and I started researching. I thought, wow, what a story. Didn't know about it at all. It didn't seem to be heard of outside of the UK. And so I wrote a short story. And at the time I was doing a course at the City Lit where I was writing my book about Monterini. And then I read them this short story, and everybody said, no, but that needs to be in the book. And I thought, oh, they're right. So I incorporated it in the book. And that was about the stage that it became Monterini and the area of Salone, which incorporated Tuscany and Emilia-Romagna. And then, of course, I just did more research and discovered more things and incorporated more things into the book.
So is she the only Jewish person left
There's
in the book?
And there is her son who helped me. He's also one of the main directors of the association at Little Jerusalem, but she is, I mean, he doesn't do very much. It's really her. And she has a nephew who's less involved. So they are the three Jews there. There's one other Jewish man who comes from Rome, but he has a house there. And then there's us four who go there as often as we can. Yeah.
Now, as the novel opens, the Levi family, Jacobo's family, are living in a part of the village called the Frata.
Yes.
And I believe that's where your house is yes. Now, is it?
Yes, but I showed you just now with the flowers. That's the Frata.
But there's also a ghetto where it seems most, if not all, of the other Jews live. And I wondered if it was unusual that a Jewish family at that time would be living outside of the ghetto.
Not at that time. Earlier on, it would have been. So Piano in the around 1550, something like that, the mid 16th century. And they came because they were expelled from the Papal States, and they were also expelled from a town in the north of Tuscany called Monte San Salvino. Most of them in Monte San Salvino were completely they were decimated. And it was all to do with the Papal Bulls, which were the laws at the time, which just excluded Jews from the villages. So they moved to Pitigliano because there was a very lovely count there, Count Orsini, who had absolutely no problem with Jews. And he had a doctor who was called David de Pomis, and he really liked this doctor. So who was Jewish. So he was very happy to welcome Jews into the village. And they started to come in. And so at that stage, they lived in a particular area. But the ghetto, I mean, there was the area of the ghetto, but it became much more marked as a ghetto when Count Medici came to power later on in the 18th century, which was when the ghetto was really formed as a ghetto. And something that's quite interesting, actually, is that when the Count fell out with the Jews, when Count Medici fell out with the Jews, he wanted to send them back into the ghetto behind their doors. So what he did was he sent his soldiers with these batons, and they would knock on the door, and it would be, the word in Italian is splattare, which is to evict. And so these batons became the delicacy that is sold in Pitigliano, and this is unique to Pitigliano. It's a baton-shaped kind of like dessert sweet thing cake. It's baton-shaped and it's full of almonds and dates and honey. And it's what the Jews always had for Rosh Hashanah, and it's what the Catholics have now for their New Year. So you can see how the customs are very, very linked. And you can see they were unique to Pitigliano, but you can see them now in other parts of Tuscany, but it is a Pitigliano delicacy.
So you had your location, you had your characters.
Yeah.
Did you plan the whole story before you wrote it, or did it sort of evolve as you were going along?
It evolved and it changed, and it changed all the way through. It evolved and it changed, and new characters were added. I did many drafts. This story has had a very long trajectory, this novel. It's taken a long time to get to where it was. I was working full time. I had young children. writing wasn't something I was able to do till much later, but I had the ideas there and I started doing the research, and eventually I started writing it. And again, it took many, many drafts to get it to where it is now. And even actually in 2013, I was writing the book and I had done several drafts, but then I discovered about Erich Priebke, who was the German who I mentioned in the book, and he comes in much later actually. And he died in 2013, and I was reading a lot about it, and I thought, I have to include these things that happen outside of Pitigliano to make it an authentic version of what happens in Italy. So then I included the whole topic of the Fosse Ardeatine, which was a terrible murder that he actually was responsible for. And then this also tied in with the partigiani and the partisans. And so that became part of my story as well. So it did really evolve as the years went on.
This is when the Nazis were rounding up people at random, sort of 10 locals for every German that was killed.
Yes, that was very much a Nazi. So really, until the Germans came, the Jews were relatively safe, actually. In Pitigliano, they were safe, and in the areas around. And the story I talk about with the villa, which is a true story, Jews, these little orphans were brought in from mainly from the former Yugoslavia and parts of Germany. And these were mainly Jewish orphans, but a few of them were from Roma or communist homes, and their parents had been killed by the Nazis. And they were brought to Italy by a Jewish organization called Della Sem. But the fascist government kind of knew about it, but turned a blind eye. And they brought them there and they passed them off as Catholic orphans. And they were able to do this because of Italy being Italy at the time. And as I said before, they were much more interested in the anti-fascists. So the Jews that were caught and sent to concentration camps or incarcerated, like Leonie Ginsberg, Carlo Levi, Primo Levi, all these Jews where the people talk about saying, oh, they were sent to Auschwitz. They were sent because they were anti-fascists. They weren't sent because they were Jewish. And Primo Levi always said, when you are in Italy, you say that you are Jewish. If you're pushed over the border and you have to go somewhere else and you're deported, you say that you are a communist or a partigiani. And that was very much the story. And that all changed in 43. So in 43, when the Germans came, the situation was really dire and they had to hide, they had to leave, because if they stayed in the village, they had to leave. Now, what happened with the villa was that the children did stay in the villa. They were passed off as Catholics and everything was fine. And then one day, I hope I'm not giving too much away, but one day, one of the girls said something in German and somebody heard them, and then they had to get them out, and they managed to get most of them to Palestine. And that was the story of the Jews, and that's completely true story.
So that's a true story. And of course, the Jews of the village also leave very quickly, and presumably that's based in some fact as well.
Immediately, they had to go immediately. As soon as the armistice was done, they got rid of Mussolini, Badoglio took over, they had to leave straight away. And they knew they had to leave and they had to get out, because they knew as soon as the Germans came in, as soon as they approached from the south, that would be it. So it was dangerous. As soon as the Germans came, everything changed. And that's where my character Bella actually says that she felt safer when she knew Mussolini was there. And that's where it actually changes for them. And they had to hide. So in the village, in Pitigliano, they were all taken to different hiding places and they were all helped. And that every single one of the Jews who lived in Pitigliano were helped. There is a plaque outside the synagogue, and I'll show a picture of the synagogue in a minute. There is a plaque outside the synagogue of Pitiglianese Jews who did die during the war, during the Holocaust, but they were Jews that had moved to other places, to other cities. But in Pitigliano, they were all saved, which is remarkable, which is just the most remarkable story, which is why I was so inspired to write it.
I can imagine. So all told, how long did it take you to write the book?
Oh gosh, years. I mean, probably
years.
To the end. I mean, years to write it. And then I got an agent in 2017. I probably started writing it in about 2004, something like that, when I finished working. And then I started teaching, so I had more time. Probably about 2004, and I got an agent in 2017. So it was more or less at the stage it is now, more or less. She helped me. things, but that was so probably 13 years. Yeah.
So the author who I spoke to last week spent a month up a mountain in Italy writing his book. Did you just sort of fit this in and then around everything else you were doing, or was there a sort of concentrated time of
concentrated, which is why it took me so long? It was really snatched. The time, it was snatched in between working, in between thinking, in between family. Yeah, it was snatched, which is not the right way to write. Of course, you need to be up a mountain for a month, but no, I didn't have that option.
Now, the story has a lot of twists and turns, and certainly later in the book, as a reader, you're often caught out by something completely unexpected. But you, as the writer, obviously anticipate and expect these things. So how do you sort of create that distance between where you're sitting and where your reader is sitting, so that you know you're going to continue to surprise whoever's reading?
I don't think I thought about the reader, actually. I think I tried not to think about the reader, because I think if you try and think about the reader and who you're writing for, it becomes very formulaic. And actually, I wanted to write for me, and maybe that's why it took me so long and why it was so hard to get it published, because I really wanted to write for me, and I wanted to write the story actually for the village as well. I wanted to write the story for the village, and so I wasn't really thinking about who would like to read it. I was trying to write something that I would like to read, I suppose. And what I did was, I enjoy looking at a piece of history, and taking the details of a piece of history, and then having, imagination, evocative images, and inventing. And that's what I really like. So for somebody who is a historical purist, they might not like that, reading a piece of fiction, but then I suppose you could read a non-fiction about that period. And there has been a lot of books written about Pitiliano, mainly in Italian, and a couple have translated quite badly, but they're mainly in Italian. They're written by people who lived in Pitiliano. And I wanted to write a fictional account, which I could then invent. And what I did was I took the history that actually happened, all the events that occurred with Mussolini, all the rulings, everything was true. And I wove it around my characters' lives. And I took the stories that people told me. They were all very generous in the village. And I took all the stories and I wove those around my characters' lives. And that's what I did. And that's what I enjoyed doing, actually.
Now, one thing about this book that's quite unusual is the use of what we might call magic realism, which is quite unusual for contemporary British writing, at least. And it adds a very different layer to the book. What made you do this?
It's an interesting question, because there has been some mixed reports about this character. That's the magic realism. The character's called Tanakila. There has been a mixture, and I did it because there were two things I wanted to show. Pitiliano is on an Etruscan mound, and there are Etruscan caves all the way around Pitiliano, and some of the villagers use it just to put their wine bottles in. It's really incredible. And these were real Etruscan tombs, and probably Etruscan homes as well. We don't really know, because we don't know much about the Etruscans. They were eradicated by the Romans, and very little is left of them and their civilization. They're also the most incredible Etruscan pathways that crisscross Pitiliano and the neighboring villages. And all that was very interesting. And I wanted to find a way of bringing in this Etruscan element. And then I also wanted to find a way of bringing in the element of intuition and magic, because for me, there is something extremely magical about the town. I don't know what it is, but some of my friends who've been there as well felt that sense of something special, something magical, and it is magical. So I thought a good way of bringing that sense of intuition, magic, and Etruscan life is through an Etruscan character, and have my characters having a premonition. And, people do have premonitions in life. And so I made this character appear to Bella. Jacopo had a sense of it, but wasn't quite aware enough of what the character was. So that's what I played with. So I played with it, really. And for some people it worked, for other people it didn't. For me, it worked.
You describe her as a haruspex.
Yes, that's somebody who tells the future. Did it work for you, this character?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a big fan of contemporary Indian writing where this is part of the course. And I just think it's wonderful that you can, it's like, in a sense, being a bit of a child again, that magic can happen. And there's nothing unusual about it. You have reality, and we all know what's real, but there are these things that are not real that also happen, and why not?
Okay, well, I'm glad you liked it, but that was a bit of a bone of contention for some of my readers, I think.
But you also make several references to Kabbalists, Jacobo studying Kabbalistic texts, and at one point in the book having a sort of revelation where the penny drops what these things he was reading really meant. You even quote from the Zohar as your opening quote to the book. Where did you pick this up from?
Well, I researched it, and the quote at the beginning is a lovely quote because it's all about love, and actually that's what this is very much about. It's loving acts of kindness that people have done for each other during this period, both with the villa, with the partisan priest that saves these children, and the individuals who save the children, and also in Pitiliano, or the contadini that saved the Jews. So it's all about really tiny, lovely acts of kindness. And that's what I felt it was really important to put that quote about the Zohar. I found it interesting studying bits about the Kabbalah, and I wanted, this was also part of Jacobo's kind of premonition, but the Kabbalah has a sense of intuition and premonition about it. It's on a different level, and that's what I wanted to portray. So he was partly interested in that different level, but not enough when it came to Tanakila. So I wanted to show that, and I wanted to show the discrepancy as well between them. We haven't shown the photos of the synagogue though, so maybe I could just share my screen if I'm able to do that. Bear with me, everyone, because this is not my forte. Right, definitely not my forte. I might need some help.
No, I think you're doing fine.
Yeah, I can't. Alan, do you think? Here we go. Here we go. So this is the synagogue. So I think it's really nice to show the synagogue, and I'm going to show the entrance, but I don't think I showed that just now. So this is the main entrance to the synagogue that was built in the 19th century. The one that was built in 1598, it's just the remains of it are within this building. So this building is now the synagogue. It houses the synagogue and the museum. That's the entrance. And unfortunately, I couldn't get a full picture of the inside of the synagogue. I did ask the girl who worked there to make a photo for me, but it's full of, she told me it was full of boxes for COVID. So they've got all their COVID boxes there so they can provide masks for everyone coming to the shul. So this was the best photo she could give me on the right. But you can see very clearly the beautiful ornate gallery there, which marks the women's gallery at the top, and it's this beautiful wooden ornate kind of, I think it's the shape of a tree. I can't see very clearly, and I can't remember, but it's a beautiful piece of woodwork, and that's the women's gallery at the top, and you can see that the shul is really beautiful. And on the left, it's just a little bit of the entrance to the shul. And then I'm going to show you that my favorite room in the museum is this room. And this is the room of the matzah ovens, which I mentioned in the book as well. And it's where all the women used to come along to make their matzahs for Passover. Matzah is made out of its unleavened bread. So what they would do, they would bring their dough and they would put it on those two slabs that you can see there. They would form the dough, and then they would put it on these long forks and put it in the oven. And I can show you a photo. This is a photo of the women making the dough. You can see it there quite clearly. And I found that whole story really beautiful. And there are a lot of other rooms in the museum. There's a room where they made the wine. There was a room where there was a mikveh going back to the 16th century. There's lots of different sections of the museum, but my favorite room is the matzah oven room. So I wanted to include a photo of that. Okay. No, I'll show this one. This is really lovely as well. We decided in 2017 that we would have a Seder, which is the Passover meal in Pitigliano. And this is a house that was given by the Comune for a visiting rabbi. So if a rabbi comes to Pitigliano for a service on a Shabbat or for a bar mitzvah, they have a house to stay in. But at the time, it was just after there had been a lot of attacks around the world, terrorist attacks and attacks in Italy as well. And so the Italian government, being the way it is towards the village and towards the history and culture of Pitigliano, decided to send the military to Pitigliano to guard the shul. And they were there for several years and they lived in this house. And then the year that they left, it was before they were able to refurbish the house for the rabbi. Elena Survey said, we can use it for our Seder. So this was the first time we were able to have a Seder. We've been planning it for years and years since I first arrived, that we had this wonderful Seder there. And the thing about it that was so amazing, it was the four of us, Elena Survey and two of her family members from Israel. And the rest were the non-Jews who were involved in the synagogue, the two girls that work in the museum, the other lady that works in the shop, and another family who are really involved and spend their whole life dedicated to the synagogue. So that was very, very special.
There's clearly something quite specific about this place, even now. You know, when you're talking about these attacks, I mean, there clearly is rising anti-Semitism in Italy. That, you know, they do have issues and they do have problems, and yet on the other hand, this town welcomes you as a visiting Jew warmly, and is delighted that you're there. So there does seem to be a real difference between Pitigliano and perhaps other places in Italy.
Yes, I mean, I think a lot of the anti-Semitism has been talked about because there's a lot of, with the Lega, Salvini, it's a lot of far right rhetoric going on here. The parties are, the Lega was part of Mussolini, originally Mussolini's party, which is not good news, to be honest. So I think a lot of that is also stimulated by a lot of refugees that are coming in and asylum seekers. And so everybody's lumped together, Jews and asylum seekers. And there's a lot of anti-Semitism and a lot of racism going on and a lot of far right rhetoric. However, not in this village. And the thing that's so amazing in this village is that people say to me, I mean, they do this, you know, your history is our history. And I think they really feel that. It's really important to them. And that's why it's such a special, for me, it was such a special place and such a special story to write.
Now, the book moves at a certain pace. It sort of plods on quite nicely, and you get quite sucked into reading it and enjoying the prose. It's very real. You feel like you're there. And then I suppose 50 or so pages from the end, the pace really changes. The pace of the book really speeds up. I wondered if that was deliberate.
I think it does speed up. I would think personally it maybe speeds up before the last 50 pages. It might speed up in the last third because I think what happens speeds up in their lives in the last third. Whereas at the beginning of the book, it is slower because their life was slower. It was about grapes and it was about singing to the grapes and it was about working and carrying on being a Jew and being a contadino and living a very happy life. And okay, Mussolini was coming to power, but it wasn't too terrible for most people. There's only Jacopo that felt it, but most people didn't. And then suddenly things change. And I think things started to change in 1938 with the racial laws, and then it starts to speed up. And you're right, it does speed up because things speeded up. Things sped up, sorry, things sped up because of the situation that they were going through, and life became much more worrying, and it was really quite haunting. And I think that I was trying to show that fast pace with the fast changing of the rules that happened. So yes, it does speed up, and then a lot of things do happen towards the end as well. And I think one of my initial drafts, my initial reasoning in writing the book was to show, as I mentioned before, really lovely, kind acts that happened. And that's what I really wanted to do. And it was about how many people saved people's lives. But I think what happened is I did more and more research, and I discovered things that were really quite awful. I felt that in order to write an authentic account of what happened in Italy, and it wasn't just about Pitigliano, I'd expanded it. I had to then include some of the atrocities that occurred, which is why I then included the whole situation with Eric Pripka and the Fosse Ardeatine, and the bombing of Via Rasella, which was the partisans bombed a group of really nasty people from the north of Italy. They're from the Alto Adige, and that's the South Tyrol, and they are Italians, but they see themselves as Germans, so they love everything Teutonic. They still do. They're very much associated with German life, although they are Italian, and they were very, very pro-fascist. And the partisans put a bomb in a street where they were and killed 33. And as a result, the Germans were told that for each man killed, you kill 10 Italians. So they took a whole group of people, 335, to the Fosse Ardeatine, and they killed them. 75 were Jewish. I had to tell that story. I couldn't just leave it out because it existed. And although there were wonderful acts of kindness, there were also some atrocities. And I felt I had to include them for it to be authentic.
Now, the book is written in the past tense, and yet the last chapter's in the present tense. Now, without spoiling the ending, what was you thinking there?
Well, I suppose it would spoil the ending if I say what I was thinking, but I suppose.
Okay, well, let's leave it as a mystery.
It's the return. It was now. It's what happened now. It was a new start, and it made it now rather than the past. So even though it was in 1946, it was the new start, and it was now. So I think it was like trying to have a more positive feel.
Now, we've had a couple of people ask about what the villagers now think about your book. I was going to ask if it has been or will be translated into Italian.
It hasn't been. I think it would be wonderful if it could be translated into Italian, but that's the job of my publisher, Red Door, to get translation right, so that would be absolutely fantastic. My son is supposed to be going soon to the village, and he's taking 3 copies for 3 people there. Eleanor Servi, I will give one to. She doesn't speak English, but she can see the book. And Claudia, who works at the synagogue, she speaks some English, and she will have a copy of the book as well, and one is for another friend. So people mainly don't speak very much English in the village, so they wouldn't be able to read it anyway. But most of the people I know there, I have told them I've written it, and they've been following me on Twitter and on Instagram, which is really nice, even though they don't understand English.
We have a question from Carol Gold about Bella. Bella is the heroine, I suppose, the main character of the book. She's an incredibly strong girl and woman. Did you base her upon someone you know, or would you personally have liked to have her strength?
Oh, that's a really nice question. Oh, I don't know. That's a very interesting question. I don't know. Yes, I think I probably would have liked to have had her strength. I think her strength was quite amazing, although some people don't like her. And I had an article written by Jenny Fraser in the JC, and she actually said to me that Bella really, really annoyed her, and she didn't like her at all, and she didn't like the way she behaved, and she didn't like the way she behaved to Michele. And other people have said similar things to Carol Gold, that actually she was a strong character. And so a lot of people said all different things. A friend of mine contacted me from Israel this week and said he absolutely fell in love with Bella. So, you know, what's so interesting is seeing different people's views on what you've written, which is quite different from maybe what you intended. And when I was writing her again, she developed over the years. She wasn't as strong at the beginning. She developed over the years. And I think part of her strength as a child was because of the antagonism with her father, this lack of a good relationship with Jacopo. And so she developed this strength because she wasn't really parented. And she was used to getting her own way, and she carried on trying to get her own way. So I don't think I would like to have been like that, actually, too much.
We have a question, is there a Hebrew translation? And presumably that's the same answer as the Italian.
not yet, but that would be lovely as well. So that really is up to my publishers, but that would be lovely to have it translated. Yeah.
Do you think there's a sequel?
Now, I wasn't intended at all as a sequel, but my sister, I don't know if she's here, she's in the States, I don't know if she's here tonight, but she did say to me after she read the book, but there's a sequel. And I said, really? She said, absolutely. You carry on. You just carry on and you do the next 40 years. Of course, there's a sequel. I thought, maybe. I mean, I hadn't intended it. You never know.
You do get to the end and maybe there are a few loose ends. So I think...
Yeah. There are characters you don't know. And somebody else mentioned that to me, actually, what happens to certain characters. And yeah. Well, maybe subconsciously I left it in order to be able to pick them up a bit later on, perhaps. One thing I have done, and this is really a personal thing for myself and my family, I don't think I'll publish it, but I have written my memoirs about my own personal relationship with the village and with all the individual people that I am in contact with. And it's actually quite very different from this. It's a very amusing account of my life living in the village. I've spent many, many summers there, and my relationship with a lot of the old women and the men. And it's quite an amusing account. But at the moment, it's going to be a family memoir.
Well, that sounds fascinating. It's been a real pleasure to talk about this book with you, and it was a great pleasure to read it. I really enjoyed it, and I would heartily recommend it. This is the book. It's available.
Can I just show one more photo?
Oh yeah, please do.
To show, and I'm just going to show one more photo here, which I haven't shown, and I would like to show if I can get it. There's Eleanor's survey. Right, this is the villa. This is the real picture of the villa that I use as my Villa Sofia. And this is the villa that existed in Emilia-Romagna. And these were
this is the actual villa that was used.
Yeah. So
and you also mentioned at the end this character, Salamone Papo, who was one of the children in the villa.
Yes, he was. Yes.
So
and I won't say why, because some people might not have read the book. So it's a shame to kind of tell too much of the story, but I wanted to honor his name. So his name is in there. I changed the names for the other people, but I kept his name. I made him younger than he was in real life, but he was one of the children. He came from Sarajevo. Yeah.
So the book's available at all good booksellers. It's also available on Kindle for a ridiculously low price. I can't believe anybody would not buy a copy. Amanda, it's our tradition to send our speakers this book. It's called From the Leylands to Leeds 17. It's by a couple of members of the Milim committee, and it's about the migration of the Jews of Leeds from the inner city to the leafy suburbs. And all of us at Milim hope you'll enjoy this. And I also have to send you a copy of this, my photo book, Vegans in Iceland, which is actually being launched on Milim on the 8th of October. So you'll get an early copy.
Thank you.
We've got a few events up and coming through October and November. As I just mentioned, my own photo book's going to be launched here on the 8th of October, where I'll be in conversation with Sydney Thornbury, who runs the Art House in Wakefield. And then on the 12th of October, we again join the Leeds branch of the Jewish Historical Society of England for Leslie Urbach, who will be talking about Josiah Wedgwood and his response to the fate of the Jews. On Monday the 19th, we have Hadley Freeman speaking about her book, House of Glass. And then on the 26th, we have Rosie Whitehouse discussing The People on the Beach. The November programme is coming together nicely and includes local entrepreneur Larry Gould speaking about his new book. Please book tickets, find out more at milim.org.uk. It remains for me to thank our speaker, Amanda Weinberg, once again. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all at a future event. Until then, stay safe. See you soon.
Thank you very much, everyone.